Okay, hello, welcome back to another game. Today we are facing e4. I'm going to play e5 because I'm a little bit bored of knight f6 and Ali Ekin's defense positions. I'm going to go for knight c6 here and just pray we don't see a Roy Lopez because I find them very boring. We see a Ponziani. Awesome. Okay, let's go for the Yanish counter-attack. The Ponziani is nice and interesting. It's not a boring opening. I would have been fine with d4, c3, bishop c4. Any of those really, and I reckon I respect the person with the white pieces. Bishop b5 on the other hand, I'm sorry, but I can't run. I've got 2.5 liters of water here because now that's interesting actually. Coupling this c3 idea with bishop b5 suggests that if a6, bishop a4, b5, we're going to see bishop c2, and after like d4 and the break here, they're going to be able to push this pawn and activate a lovely bishop here, maybe put the queen on d3, and there's going to be mating ideas. So let's kick this bishop. I think that's a good response to start with. And then I'm thinking about getting the bishop, my own bishop, out after creating this this little spot for the bishop there on a7. If I go here and we see d4, yeah, not great. I mean, if I play this, there's a problem because this pawn is no longer protected because this knight is pinned, and I don't think b5 does anything helpful because the bishop wants to be there. Maybe even on b3, but it's going to be a good bishop. I think I am going to go bishop c5. I don't mind d4. We can step back, probably after taking. And white's going to get a nice position, but I think our position will also be quite nice, and we'll... Okay, so they're going for this pawn here, but then I don't understand this move at all, I'll be honest. I'm deliberating taking with the b pawn actually to then break d5. But if I take here, knight takes, queen e7. Oh, then you see this. Okay, say I take with my d pawn, knight takes. I can play knight takes here maybe. Okay, we are going to take with the d pawn. That opens up the bishop. I mean, also I could put the bishop on a7, move my bishop out, queen out, and look to castle behind these 4 pawns. Double pawns can actually be quite a helpful defensive resource because if you look at the squares they guard here, you know, aggressively you can't really create a passed pawn with doubled pawns. It's sort of as good as having 3 pawns, but we see d4. So not even taking this, just trading off that light squared bishop. Okay, that strikes me as very, very, very strange. I don't understand that at all. I'm gonna just drop all the way back just because of the aesthetic, I'll be honest. If this is pushed, I've got a lovely square on d5. If this is pushed, then I undo my pawns and this pawn hangs. So there's no immediate aggressive pawn put. Really? Okay. This looks like a lovely place for my knight. It's now a centrally outposted knight. I don't know. I mean, white's probably doing quite well here, but I have a centrally outposted knight. I have a nice bishop, which is putting some good pressure on this pawn here. And I think I'm going to go bishop g4 and immobilize this knight, because then if we see takes, I might take with queen and attack this, which will no longer be protected with the knight because obviously it's pinned to the queen. So, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do it. I really like the pressure this puts on here and also here. Even though I had the opportunity to resolve my double pawns there, I'm a big fan of this. Now, I can castle queenside, bring the rook here, further tempo on this. And how do you defend it? I mean, just using the pieces expertly here to put a lot of pressure there. And I mean, we're going to be able to take. Queen takes, pawn takes, bishop takes. I like that line a lot. Trade off the queens to open up open up the king here, and then just take this pawn with the bishop. And if it's attacked, we can take another pawn. And if it's traded, then we have the most active rook, and we're up a pawn in a rook and pawn endgame. So there's a lot to play with there. But I'm happy with how this has gone so far. Okay, we're in a rook and pawn endgame relatively early. I have the most active rook, which can see, it's almost maximal potential rook. It can see like everywhere that the rook could see. I think I'm going to play rook d8. The reason behind that is I want to, instead of trading the rook and giving my opponent control of the d file, I could play rook d8, but I currently have the most active rook, and if I play rook d8, I threaten to win a rook here. So unless you just decide to move off this file, you're going to have to take this, the d file being the only completely open file on the board, and both of my rooks are on there, which is awesome. I'm going to drop into d2 at some point and put pressure on both of these weaker pawns. Yeah, this is just looking really good for me, I'll be honest. Yeah, again, they'll be forced to trade. And now they can't put the rook on the d file because there's only one rook left. So that means it's going to be very hard to stop rook d2 and therefore pressure on these. So yeah, the rook goes behind this pawn. Now rook d2 looks really strong. And if you push this, I can always take it. And after your rook comes in, I can go up with my king. And there's no like rook e7 or rook g6 to attack a weak pawn. Or rook h6 for that matter, they're all held. So I'm going to play rook d2 here. Getting into that second rank is going to be really useful. Also playing king d7 is going to be quite nice at some point. But, if I played king d7 just then, my opponent could have played rook e2, and it becomes very hard then to actually attack these pawns. So even if I go across here, then the rook's holding it, and if I go across all the way after rook e2, then this can just be pushed, and the rook holds the base of the weaker pawns. And the rook holds the base of the weaker pawns. However, okay, they do push the pawn, so we're going to take and play king d7, activating the king with tempo. There are no checks. There's not even a way to stay. Look at this. We're controlling all of this, as well as all of this. So looking at all these squares, we're also controlling e2. So the rook is going to have to retreat somewhere to one of these squares. There we go. It's probably quite a good decision, but now we get time to take this. Awesome. So now we're up 2 pawns. This a pawn is hanging. Okay, the rook attacks this pawn. Now, if I push it, we're going to see rook here. Which, then if I push it, the rook can't come back here to attack this pawn immediately, so I'm going to do that. If we see rook h4, I can play h5, and the rook can't immediately attack g6 again, so I'm going to get time to bring my king over to help with the defense of this. Also, say rook h4, h5, the rook then has to go somewhere. Okay, and then we can take this pawn. However, the rook doesn't do that. I think I'm going to take this opportunity to get the king more active. Or I could start pushing one of these passed pawns. Double passed pawns, though, it's almost kind of pointless. This is effectively just 3 pawns in attack. Although we could play b5. b5 does look quite interesting. And if takes, then we resolve that problem, and we can play c5, c4, and get some super strong passed pawn. 3 connected passed pawns there. And if b5, a5, we can go rook a2, and there's no way to protect this. Actually, I really like b5. Okay, we'll go b5. There is a check, but then I go here, and the only check is e4, and then we can go... not exactly sure, but okay, now we play h5. Probably my opponent goes there with check. Okay, now I'm going to bring the king up again. White's king is completely inactive. My king is more active, and I'm up 2 pawns, so I don't know, b5 might not have been ideal, actually. Now, if I go here, we're going to see rook e7, which doesn't look ideal. Because say I take this, I kind of ruin the structure. But my rook can't really get to protect this pawn, so I think I could play king f7, but then we might see rook f4, then king here. And the rook goes across and threatens to come in with check. I think we should probably get the king active, because actually we're going to go after these weak pawns. We can't hold on to everything, especially this extremely weak backwards doubled c pawn. We're already up 2 pawns, and I don't even know if I should take here. Maybe I just push. I'm not sure. Let's calculate a line. Rook e7 takes. Rook takes c7. Okay, or just not. That's very interesting. Okay. I think I'm just going to go rook a2 and threaten to take this. It can't be pushed because I still just take. And if takes here, then I can play c takes b5. And if rook e7, actually rook c2 now does defend the c pawn because it's not doubled. Really? And you can't go here to attack this pawn. Okay. Well, we've somehow defended everything in the position, I'll be honest. Probably through some less than optimal play from my opponent. But what you're looking at here is 3 connected passed pawns. This rook is going to support the pushing of this c pawn. And yeah, this is completely winning. I mean, I'm just going to push here. Again, you can't come into e6, constantly looking at which are the weak pawns. And the weak pawns are generally the pawns that are furthest back or down, I guess, in your position. So I'll just push this. So now, yeah, the weak pawns, a6 and g6. My king is holding this one, and also a square like e6 to attack this one. My opponent could go rook a7, but then I could just bring the rook to a2. However, they go for a check, so we're going to come down here, bring in the king right next to the rook so there are no checks, and then we can go right across here, protecting the pawn. There are no checks because the king is obviously diagonally next to the rook. Now we can just support this weakness, and everything in opposition is completely held. We're holding this weakness, we're holding this weakness. Nothing else is weak because it's all just held by other things. And so my opponent's going to try and attack this, but then we're going to go here. To prevent any, I don't know. I mean, we're just going to mobilize these pawns. We're just going to get them pushing. So the rook goes up. Now I could push this, and if takes, I could probably push. Might be time to sacrifice one of the pawns, or I could simply go. Okay, this is quite funny actually. We'll just go rook b2 here. Hold this pawn and say, how is your rook now going to get? Like it's tucked itself in there. It's got like no moves now. So I'm going to push this again. Only weakness here is held by the rook, and we're just going to mobilize these. There's a check, but we're just going to step back, and the king is going to tuck itself in there. Okay, that is actually something I probably should not have allowed, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I could go over and take this if I want. We're going to see check here. Ooh, okay, I made this a little harder than I needed to. Let's just push this pawn. I mean, let's just promote. We are going to see check. And then I'm going to go king f8 or f7. I don't want to allow check and takes here with the tempo. So I think king f7. And then if takes, we can just push this again. And then if the rook goes behind, I guess we can just take this. So this should be fine. We'll go king f7. If this check, we can just go king e7, and then you can't take this because your rook hangs. So I don't think rook f6 check is great. The only reason I'm now slightly concerned is because I probably should not have allowed the potential for this h pawn to become a passed pawn. Although the rook goes behind here, wow. Really? Okay. Well, I can just push it. Again, we want to just push this pawn. We're now 1 square away from promotion. After king takes here, I can take here. Still holding this pawn as well as getting behind this one. And yeah, let's just push this one. We're going to get b3, b2, and a1. That's 3 moves. It's going to take 1, 2, 3, 4 for my opponent to promote. So we're actually going to be holding that square opposite. Simple bit of counting there. Just support this. And it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and Oh, actually, okay, they give a check. Obviously, I don't want to go. Oh, where do I want to go? Actually, this is quite interesting. Do I want to go into the back rank, or do I want to go up? Up. There's another check. Up, push, and my king. I don't want my king on this diagonal. Actually, I need to be very careful because then when I promote, they might promote with check and then take my queen. So let's just go king g8 here. If they try for a draw with these checks, we can run up, and it's not going to matter. We're one square away from promotion. And I mean, even we can put the rook behind and sack the rook because these pawns are all connected. The rook can't come over and attack this weakness because it's stuck to the a1 square. So we're completely fine here. The king moves, probably going for like some checkmate idea. But I can just play b2, I think. And if the king goes here threatening checkmate, then we can actually promote with check, which is quite nice. The rook can take this pawn. Some of you may be wondering, like, oh, why have you just hung a pawn here? But then I can promote, and even though that does hang the rook, we've just got the queen for the rook and the pawn. And once we've got the queen, that's going to be fairly easy from there. In fact, if takes, promotes, takes, is there a way for me to win the rook with some check? Yeah, there is actually. Okay, I was going to say there would be queen g1 in the end, but... Okay, let's go f7, because if I go here, we're going to see check, and I'm going to be forced back. And then let's just run away. I mean, let's just go up. We're just going to promote whenever we don't get checked, and we can eventually run to somewhere where it's going to be impossible to be checked. My opponent's got much less time. Yeah, it's going to be. We've got plenty of time to deliver checkmate. So we'll run to here, rook check here, then we go to d4, and that's going to be the last. That's going to be the last possible check without them throwing away the rook, because obviously we hide behind this c4 pawn. But yeah, okay. Oh, we're just going to promote now. I mean, okay. I mean, we might even promote both pawns if I'm feeling zesty. Although probably like rook here and queen here. I'm not quite sure why my opponent is adamantly playing on. We're gonna, in fact, yeah, there's mate and 2 on the board. Yeah, there we go, resignation. And a cleanly converted endgame. Okay, let's go into the analysis. Okay, here we are in the analysis, and I'm not sure if you can see it because my face cam may be blocking it. However, I got in a 17 average centi pawn loss, which means that on average, each move I made was 0.17 in terms of deviation from the analysis of the position after the best move was made. Bit of a weird concept, but I really like it actually. Sort of shows how far you deviate from the best engine lines. And 17 is really good, I think. So, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. I don't play a lot of this, however I used to. And I do play a lot of this as white. So, you know, I do know some of the theory. My opponent plays c3, and I gained a lot of respect for them. A Ponziani, I like it, a gentleman of culture, I see. I played a bit of knight f6, Yanish counterattack, and they hit me with a Roy Lopez. They transposed to a Roy Lopez. So, you know, any Roy Lopez players that are watching this now, please just explain to me in the comments why. That's actually just my question. Why? Anyway, we play a6. They step back with the bishop. And then I realized I could take this, but having played, because I used to play the Roy Lopez, it's my dark secret. When I was like 1300, quite close to when I started playing chess, like I used to play the Roy Lopez because I thought it was like I thought I was a grandmaster. But I remember taking on here and taking on here never being that good because of like Queen e7 and those kind of ideas. However, because of c3, I guess taking on here with my opponent is quite good because you can play d4, I guess. But okay, should have taken there, but instead went for bishop c5. Bishop c5 is still all right, but then takes, and I never understand this move. It's not a bad move, but giving the bishop pair, opening up my queen and my bishop sort of like for free. I guess you double the pawns, but that never really, you know, is a huge disadvantage in these kind of lines. I mean, there's a lot of theory where dc6 or dc3 is played with this kind of structure, and then often you try and castle queenside to, you know, make the most of it. But then we see d4 from my opponent. And after takes, and stepping back here, I could have taken this, actually. Oh, because if takes my bishop, then I take with the queen, and after king takes, there's a fork here, which is... Okay, yeah, that's really cool. If I carry on playing like this, then I will absolutely remember that. However, step back with the bishop, and I mean, it's minus 0.2. I've got no real tangible advantage. Just, you know, a very nice bishop, and I don't know, open development. It's looking pretty equal, but then, as I said, you know, white can't push either of these pawns. However, white does push one of these pawns, and as I said then, knight d5, just best move. This is a really good knight, but also this pawn right here on d4 is so much weaker now, long term, as we saw. And after knight c3, I just played bishop g4. I should play bishop e6 actually. However, I really liked weakening this because I thought actually, you know, this comes with a sort of trappy kind of idea that if knight takes here, which may look pretty intuitive. I mean, it seems like it can't be that bad, right? It's just a trade of knights. However, as you see, the eval goes to minus 4.5 because I take with queen, minus 5 now even. Taken with queen just to put so much pressure on, you know, everything in the white position, and have, you know, a really cohesive game. This e5 move just wasn't great because d5 was free for my queen. And I think from here on out, it was probably just quite a big win. Let's just scroll. Sorry about that. What is going on? Let's just scroll down here for a sec. Yeah, so you see here this graph. When it hit minus 5, it was pretty smooth sailing from there. Probably I could have done a lot of things more efficiently, but it was quite instructive, I think, in the way I did it. So let's have a look at how that happened. Bishop here, castles, and then I just castled as well, putting even more pressure on d4 here, getting my king under this barricade of pawns, and just then traded the knight, because after queen takes, pawn takes, I'm just going to take this pawn, and you don't really have a choice but to take the bishop, because otherwise e5 is going to hang. I mean, bishop f4 is a sort of a move, but then also we see b2 hangs. So bishop takes, rook takes, and as I said, it's quite easy to evaluate. This is much better for black because I'm up a pawn and I have the most active rook in the game. My rook from here can see everywhere. My rook from d4 is extremely active, and I control the only open file on the board. Every other file being either closed or semi-open. So semi-open files being where there's one color of pawn on them, like the C and the E file here, and also the G file. And are there any others? No. But then, yeah, the only open file I'm controlling. So then, you know, white puts his rook there, which the eval jumps up a bit there, or rather down, but up for me, which makes it a bit simpler, because after I just play rook d8, you have no real choice but to exchange. And after takes, you know, there's no way you're going to stop me from accessing this, which is why it's so powerful to have a rook on the open file. So my opponent plays their rook into there. I drop into d2. I'm not going to worry about exactly best moves here, as long as I didn't make any huge mistakes. In fact, let's turn on the engine for a second and just see. That's interesting, actually. King d7 was better than rook e2. Oh, and I just go into here, and actually these pawns over here are much weaker. So I'm getting my king nice and active. Okay, I chose to go into here first, into the second rank, putting pressure on these pawns, knowing that basically, okay, after takes, rook takes, I'm going to be able to play king d7, the rook's going to have to move, and then I can take this pawn here and just start cleaning up. Now, I'm 2 pawns up, but not only does taking this pawn mean that I gain an extra pawn in material, it also means that I gain a passed pawn on the board, because now there is no pawn in the D or in the B files which impedes the progress of my C pawn, or the C file for that matter. So after takes, my opponent went across here, I just pushed this pawn, and they played A4. I played B5 here, which actually apparently is the best move. That looks pretty cool. Okay, yeah, Stockfish settles on B5 is the best move. Going for the idea of undoubling the pawns, also just putting pressure on this pawn, and just starting to get my majority mobile. When you have a pawn majority, start pushing it, because towards the end of the game, you saw after rook h4, h5, the rook gives a check, king comes up, another check, king comes up again. I have a much more active king as well, that's very important, and I'm holding my weakness, but as you see, I then have now 3 connected passed pawns, and I can start pushing them like c5, c4, and I'm just pushing these pawns. And you can't really push these pawns because none of them are passed pawns. My G pawn and my king's in the way here. But as I said in the video, keeping tied to my weaknesses. A6 is quite weak, but it's going to be hard to attack. A check, the rook comes across, and then the rook goes over to A7. Just protect it with the rook. And yeah, pretty smooth sailing from here. Rook protecting on B2 there, and then just pushing these pawns. And yeah, realizing actually there's just no threat here. I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to force mate here. My rooks can always, or my rook rather, can always come in, take this and give a check. And yeah, after we just step out of the way, push this pawn, we are 1 square away from promotion, whereas white hasn't been able to get the same ability. So takes, rook comes over. Oh, I had a significantly better move there. We'll have a look at that. Oh yeah, okay. I should have just played c3 actually. Why did I not play c3? Taking this pawn is such a waste of time, actually. Yeah, that's kind of weird. If I'd played c3, the idea is that I'm going to play c3 and c2, and your rook isn't going to be able to be behind both of them, so I will just promote. However, yeah, I take this pawn, still completely winning, and just start pushing these. And I've got 3 connected passed pawns here, and after a couple checks, or rather a check, and then the king comes down, I just push this pawn. And the line I was talking about was check, promotes, and if he takes this, I'm going to actually have queen g1 to win back the rook. But yeah, I mean, very smooth sailing after this. Run away from all the checks, get to my safe space, promote the queen, and I mean, yeah, it's just resignation because there's nothing to do. It's mate in 6 by force, but let's say we saw, I don't know, this pawn pushed, then actually we're going to see queen check here probably. Oh, okay, let's actually turn the eval on because I'm bad at chess. Mate in 5, oh, rook check, sorry. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Rook check and queen g6 is also an idea. Queen comes across and takes this pawn. Rook sacrifices itself. King runs, but then we see check, king here, and yeah, checkmate. That's just one of the examples of how the game could have gone. So yeah, very, very clean opening into middle game, transfer, putting pressure on the weaknesses, and then hopefully a pretty instructive rook endgame. Thank you very much for watching. I'd really appreciate comments, likes, subscribe, all of it really goes quite a long way in terms of helping grow the channel. So yeah, thank you very much. Goodbye.